And I know people sort of talk about, you should change your trainers every 6 months or every 500 miles or something like that. Any thought? I mean, you're telling us it's person specific, but any sort of like just finger in the wind that people should be following?
It's person specific. It's shoe specific. Like there's a lot of specifics to it. I think like honestly, just like check your shoes every now and again. Like flip them over, have a look on the underside. The amount of times I flip them over and I'm just like showing to the patient, like, can you see this bald patch? That's probably a good indication that these were done about 6 months ago. And it's as simple as that. Like, if you see a great big bald patch, it's probably not a good thing. Sometimes there's things that fly under the radar. So the outer sole and the grip and stuff might look fine. But I might sort of go through and I'm sort of really just trying to sort of press through the foam to get an impression of how, like, has this sort of blown out? You refer to the material basically no longer having any pushback. And it's like, ooh, this compresses loads. It's like, that's not going to be great either. That's a little bit more nuanced to sort of figure out. What I usually encourage people to do is, if they're fitting into that sort of category of, 2 to 3 runs a week, sort of clocking up between sort of, 20 and, 50K a week, I'd probably have like 3 shoes in rotation. And you just sort of like, if you bought them at a staggered sort of 3-month, and you just new shoe every sort of 3 months, and you just rotate the old one out, and you just rotate the old one out. Maybe it's sort of one of those things you go, cool, fine, do it annually. Annual to 9 months, that sort of is also a pretty good sort of thing to think about. The high performance shoes, like that's when you're really getting up to the high end of things, but you can see some of those things like last a run. When we're talking about the super high performance shoes, the ones that they're sort of doing the records and stuff in the marathon and stuff, generally speaking, they're a single run shoe. They're one and done. So that's why we like the more mileage shoes, because we can trust that the patients are usually going to be less good at identifying that they probably should have changed their shoes. Maybe they're sort of like, I'm not running that often in them. I can probably leave them for a little bit longer. And I can sort of have a little bit more faith in the shoe that it's going to probably hold up a little bit better than if they're in something else maybe.
And as a runner, we've all got that pair of shoes that we just can't throw away. And they've got no grip left on them. They're not offering you no support at all, but they're like your magic shoe that you dust out and you bring out every time you've got a big run. And it's really, really hard to throw those away. So, but yeah, good. I mean,
and it happens, and that's fine. But my sort of thing with that is, I like to give patients like a broad range to check out, and it's like very rarely I'm going, you need this specific shoe. It's, hey man, the shoe industry is great at the moment. Like there is so much options. Worldwide commerce and everything at the moment is super interesting, because if ever there was a time for you with your weird foot, your weird sort of thing going on. If ever there was a time for you to find the niche thing that works for you, it's now. Because there's so much stuff. Like I'm always just going like, hey man, like try this. You find nothing there? Send me another email. I'll ping you out some more stuff. I'll just keep looking. But there's so many options, which is such a really great thing to be in. I think we're still figuring out how to make shoes and how to design shoes, but certainly it's pretty good.
I know people that will be watching this are going to be going, just give us your top your top 3. So you mentioned the sort of differential between your sort of like your ones that you clock up your miles in versus your sort of race shoes. So in each of those categories, if you just were to throw out sort of 2 or 3 names, brands, particular shoes, what would you be saying?
I'll try and break it down to something a little bit different. So when I prescribe shoes, or I'm discussing shoes with a patient, usually I'm talking about features. So I like to prescribe or discuss shoes based on the features, based on what is the person's needs. Now, needs can be based off what sort of shoe do we want? Is it a mileage trainer? Do we want a trail shoe? Do we want a race shoe? Kind of the broad sort of strokes for that. Then we've got pathology. Well, pathology is quite varied, and that will certainly color sort of what we're going to recommend for that particular patient as well. Okay. If we've got something that's quite, let's say, lateral, so down the outside portion of their foot, I'm wanting something that's probably neutral in a shoe, because the main sort of broad categories of shoe as they're sort of still making runners is neutral and stability support, anti-pronation, whatever sort of word you want to use through there. Now, if they've got issues down the outside and they go for more of a support shoe, generally speaking, that's more built up on the inside and is going to potentially drive more force. So you're then trying to differentiate that, whether we want sort of more stability or we want neutral. If we've got someone talking about sort of earlier, sort of an Achilles issue, cool. Generally speaking, we're very considerate about drop, which is that heel to toe difference.
Just explain that a little to just in case people aren't aware of what that actually is.
So there's lots of different features that we sort of think about with shoes. A very common one is going to be referred to as drop or heel drop.
Yeah.
So essentially, it's just the angle that the heel and toe has a difference. You will have shoes that come in at 0. They're a little bit more infrequent. Generally speaking, most running shoe brands will be somewhere between 4 up to about 12 is sort of the broad sort of range. And so, if you have someone with a bit of an Achilles issue that's quite irritable, generally speaking, we do find that sometimes if we elevate the heel a little bit more, we can unload that tissue just a little bit more. It can make it a little bit more tolerant to the running training and things like that. So we'll usually go for more of a higher drop shoe. It's kind of not to be confused with stack, which is more of a newer thing that we're sort of talking about these days. And that's just the general just sort of height.
Yeah.
So we've got the general height, which some people sort of like, they get a bit too high and they go, ooh, I feel a bit unsteady up here. Well, in that case, you're not necessarily looking to change the drop. You're looking to maybe drop the stack height down a little bit. So you're a little bit closer to the ground, but we still might be wanting that drop to get the ankle mechanics just a little bit more what we were after.
Okay, so that's some really good tips there. In terms of with the race shoe, anything in particular that you would say with regard to any brands, any particular sort of front runners at the moment?
Honestly, it's user's choice. There's some really, really good stuff coming out from across the board. Nike's obviously really close to leading the charge with that. They just, very, very good at high performing shoes. But you've got very, very good performance shoes across the board. They're all competing at that. The thing that I would sort of generally sort of go with that is I'm usually probably more encouraging people to sort of, try and select a little bit based on feel, based on fit.
Yeah.
So certain shoes are going to fit people a little bit better because the shoe companies, the upper and the sort of shape of the shoe is based around what's called like a last. So that's sort of an imaginary sort of shape of what a person's foot looks like.
Yeah.
And all the different companies have slight varying perceptions of their last. And that's where you get the slight sort of differences and changes. You have some come in and sort of go, I can never really wear Asics. They just really don't work for my foot. But these ones over here, they're great.
And that's what that's about. That's interesting.
Generally speaking, that's what that's about. So when we're sort of talking performance shoes, usually I'm like, look, you kind of got to go out, dip your toe into a few different things. The performance shoes typically these days are coming with carbon plates.
And that's quite relatively new, yeah?
Yeah, a couple of years now. The plates at a interesting sort of concept.
Yeah.
So we might refer to it as sort of ergonomics or different sorts of things. Essentially, we're sort of creating greater efficiency when our athletes are running, which allows them to further and faster with less sort of economical like deficit. They're having to expend less energy, which is our theory sort of around sort of why that's sort of encouraging sort of faster movement.